In 2025, Liam Neeson once again embarks on a mission to rescue people, but this time he is accompanied by the beautiful actress Fan Bingbing. Together, the two stage a thrilling adventure. Without further ado, let's begin our story. This film closely follows the previous one. After losing his younger brother, the protagonist Mike has been struggling emotionally for a long time. Things had even reached the point where he needed psychological counseling. One day, after finishing his therapy, Mike returned home. He was organizing some personal belongings left by his late brother Gertie. Among those belongings, Mike found a letter his brother had written to him. In this letter, Gertie wrote that while he was alive, he never had the chance to climb Mount Everest. He expressed his wish that after his death his ashes could be scattered on the peak. Mike wholeheartedly agreed with his brother's wish. He immediately booked a flight ticket to fulfill Gertie's last wish. Meanwhile, at the foot of the Himalayas, an unscrupulous developer was trying to deceive the local villagers. He vigorously promoted a hydroelectric power project, claiming that it would bring prosperity and employment opportunities to everyone in the village. However, the villagers were not naive. They knew clearly that building a dam would submerge their homes and devastate the local ecosystem. They declared that the spring water of the Himalayas was sacred and couldn't be spoiled by outsiders. Under the village chief's leadership, none of the villagers agreed to the developer Kun's demands. Kun had already invested a large sum of money into the project and was determined to build the dam by any means necessary. Since the villagers wouldn't cooperate willingly, Kun resorted to violence. He ordered his men to block the village elders on the mountain road and deliberately drove into them without hesitation. He declared that those who opposed him must die. However, Kun and his men didn't anticipate that a young man had gotten off the vehicle earlier and survived the tragedy by sheer luck. Terrified, the young man rushed back to the village and found the village chief, who was his grandfather's father. In panic, he informed the chief that Kun's people had murdered his grandfather. When the police arrived at the scene, they quickly concluded that it was simply a traffic accident, not murder. But the young man anxiously warned the chief, saying, "We're next, Father Rodriguez will kill you and me, we will not let him." At the same time, Mike was preparing to board his flight. However, an airport security officer stopped him abruptly. According to regulations, human remains must be transported in approved containers. Having no other option, Mike went to the restroom to transfer his brother's ashes. He quickly apologized to his brother's spirit for this inconvenience. Despite a troublesome journey, Mike eventually landed safely at his destination. Since it was his first time here, he was unfamiliar with the local situation and had to ask for directions along the way. After considerable effort, he finally located the guest house. Mike immediately asked the receptionist where he could find the guide he had booked for the Everest base camp. Upon hearing his name, a man named Danny quickly approached. Mike greeted him warmly and showed him his guide identification. Danny was a half Sherpa, half Malaysian man who had already successfully reached Everest's summit 10 times. He was among the region's most experienced and elite guides. The two men then immediately drove towards Everest. On the way, they observed some soldiers training. Danny mentioned he had previously served in the military, making carrying oxygen tanks for Mike extremely easy. Before long, they reached their destination. They took their luggage and boarded a sightseeing bus heading towards the mountain. After settling into their seats, a father and daughter boarded the bus. The father, Ethan, sat down first. His daughter, Rose, however, seemed completely disinterested. Her attention was entirely absorbed by her electronic device. She casually placed her luggage, causing Mike's belongings to fall to the floor. Seeing this, Danny quickly stepped forward to defend his client. Just as an argument was about to break out, Rose's father, Ethan, hurriedly apologized. He quickly put their luggage back onto the overhead rack. Seeing this, Danny backed off and said nothing more. Soon the bus began its journey towards Everest. Trying to enliven the atmosphere, the driver enthusiastically introduced local points of interest to the passengers. Little did they know, disaster was about to strike. Meanwhile, the young man who had previously escaped was busy stocking up several months' worth of food at the local market, hoping to hide from his pursuers. However, he didn't realize that every move he made was being closely watched. The village chief grew worried when his son didn't return and hurriedly called the young man, urging him to come home immediately and reminding him to use a secret code if he had to send messages. After hanging up the phone, the young man boarded the same sightseeing bus that Mike and Danny were on. The assassins who had been secretly watching him followed him onto the bus. The female assassin casually took a seat next to the young man, while her male counterpart aggressively stared down a nearby passenger who nervously moved to another seat. Once the bus was underway, the female assassin pulled out a cigarette and offered one to the young man who awkwardly declined. Suddenly, both assassins revealed their guns, warning everyone to remain quietly seated. Under the threat of real firearms, the passengers obediently complied. Satisfied no one would resist, the male assassin dragged the young man forward and began searching him, eventually finding his phone. Meanwhile, the female assassin ordered everyone else to hold their phones above their heads. The frightened passengers obeyed, and once all phones were collected, she threw them out of the bus window. She then approached the driver, forcing him at gunpoint to follow her instructions. Terrified, the driver immediately complied. The assassins called their boss to report the situation, unaware that Danny overheard their conversation. Danny whispered quietly to Mike that according to what he knew, these assassins in Nepal were ruthless, never leaving witnesses alive. Considering they had shown their faces openly, Danny assumed they planned to kill everyone on board from the start. The bus was stopped by a herd of sheep blocking the road. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Danny quickly grabbed an ice axe from the overhead rack and handed it to Mike, who swiftly climbed out through the hatch and punctured one of the bus tires. After finishing, he hurried back to his seat. Moments later, the female assassin noticed smoke coming from the rear and went to investigate. As the tire suddenly blew out, the bus began violently swerving, throwing everyone inside into chaos. Mike and Danny seized the moment and attacked simultaneously. Danny knocked the gun out of the female assassin's hand, but she surprisingly drew another smaller weapon hidden at her waist. Danny quickly improvised by using boots as makeshift shields to compensate for being unarmed. Mike tackled the male assassin and managed to wrestle away his gun, but the magazine fell to the floor, leaving no time to retrieve it. They grappled fiercely until Mike grabbed a climbing stick and stabbed it into the assassin's waist, successfully knocking him out of the bus. Mike then rushed to Danny's aid against the female assassin, but her skills were too formidable, and Mike couldn't gain any advantage. At a crucial moment, Rose spotted a gun on the floor and swiftly kicked it toward Danny, who quickly grabbed it and knocked out the assassin. With both attackers subdued, the passengers were momentarily relieved, but the damaged tire remained a serious issue. Worse still, the bus had stopped dangerously close to the edge of a cliff, and any small movement could send everyone tumbling to their doom. Fortunately, the driver skillfully stabilized the vehicle just in time, allowing the passengers to carefully disembark. However, Mike suddenly realized that he'd left his brother's ashes on the bus in a dangerously precarious position. Anxiously, Mike retrieved the urn using a climbing stick. Just then, the female assassin regained consciousness, but the police finally arrived, prompting everyone to hurriedly explain the events. Danny handed the assassin's weapon to the police, believing the immediate danger was resolved. To continue their journey, the driver needed to repair the bus, and the passengers decided to rest briefly in a nearby village. Ethan planned to interview local villagers, but soon found they were suspicious of outsiders. Meanwhile, the driver informed Danny that the bus axle required welding. Mike volunteered for the job, provided they had welding equipment. Danny then noticed Ethan struggling to communicate with a local policeman who didn't speak English and stepped in to help translate. When the officer departed, Rose approached and asked her father why the village seemed deserted. Ethan explained that a businessman wanted to construct a massive dam in the Himalayas, but one family refused to sell their land, causing tensions that drove villagers away. As they spoke, police vehicles escorted developer Kun and another bus prepared for tourists into the village, clearly indicating local authorities had been bribed. Sensing danger, Ethan questioned a policeman fluent in English about the young man's status, but received suspiciously evasive answers. Ethan recalled another officer earlier mentioned the young man had regained consciousness, contradicting this policeman's claim. Additionally, local police typically patrolled only once daily, yet had arrived promptly after the bus accident, which seemed too coincidental. Ethan instructed Rose not to board the new bus arranged by the police. Meanwhile, Kun confronted the captured young man, demanding to know his father's whereabouts. The young man defiantly refused, stating his family would never sell their land, and boldly challenged Kun to search the entire mountain. Kun became furious and threatened the young man. Elsewhere, Ethan, sensing trouble, sought out Mike to inform him of the developer's violent intimidation tactics toward villagers. Ethan pointed out inconsistencies in the official explanation for the elderly man's death, asserting that the local police were colluding with Kun. Recognizing the imminent danger to the young man named Shuai, Ethan, Mike, and Danny hurried to the room where Shuai was being held. When the policeman guarding the door refused them entry, Mike swiftly knocked him unconscious. The three quietly entered, discovering the police torturing Shuai. Ethan angrily threatened to inform the U.S. Embassy, but Mike emphasized rescuing Shuai was their first priority. Using a weapon seized earlier, Danny warned the officers not to move. Unfazed and confident in their powerful local connections, the policeman arrogantly refused to yield. Just then, Kun arrived with reinforcements, prompting the police to take refuge behind him. Ethan boldly lied, claiming he represented the U.S. State Department and had already contacted the embassy. Kun laughed off the bluff, exposing Ethan's lie. A fierce fight erupted, but heavily outnumbered Mike and his companions struggled. Danny managed to escape with Shuai, while Mike held off the enemies. Danny urgently shouted for everyone to get on the bus and escape. When Rose noticed Ethan missing, Danny couldn't bring himself to reveal the harsh truth. Mike eventually managed to escape and joined them on the bus, admitting sadly that Ethan didn't survive. But before Rose could process her grief, their vehicle was abruptly stopped again. The bus driver hurriedly reversed, but enemies were already blocking the path behind them. At this moment, the police received orders to eliminate everyone except Shuai. As the officers aimed their guns, Mike shouted for everyone to duck while Danny quickly returned fire. Mike took control of the bus after the injured driver collapsed, steering aggressively to ram and push aside pursuing police vehicles. Despite Mike's successful maneuvering, Kun continued his relentless pursuit, prompting Mike to grab a knife to defend against further attacks. After the intense chase, Mike touched his abdomen and realized he'd been wounded earlier, but kept silent to avoid alarming the others. Meanwhile, Danny attempted to treat the badly wounded driver whose condition was rapidly deteriorating. At the same time, Kun's men cleared the roadblock with heavy machinery, allowing them to resume their pursuit. After driving for a while, Mike's bus stopped. Shuai suggested they head towards the Chinese border, where construction workers and soldiers would provide safety. However, Mike asked about the village chief's hiding place instead. Shuai knew the location but warned the path was dangerously steep, icy, and slippery, and a single misstep could be fatal. Mike saw this as an advantage, believing the difficult terrain would help evade their pursuers. The gravely injured driver, knowing he was dying, insisted he did not want to perish inside the vehicle he'd driven his whole life. Honoring his wish, the group carefully lifted him out and placed him beside a rock. Danny emotionally bid him farewell, and Mike handed him a gun for protection before continuing their journey. Soon the group reached the hazardous, icy route Shuai had described. They realized blindly driving onward would be suicidal, so Shuai advised using the winch as a safety precaution. They secured the cables, and Mike cautiously maneuvered the bus forward. Midway, the bus suddenly stopped, and they discovered the winch engine had begun smoking, requiring immediate attention. Mike instructed Shuai to hold the brakes while urgently searching for tools, deciding that cutting the winch cable was their only hope, despite having only a 50% chance of success. Danny smashed the rear window with a hammer, vigorously striking the cable connection until it broke free as the bus slid. Precariously, Mike desperately controlled the wheel, guiding the vehicle safely across the ice. The passengers survived unharmed, but the bus axle was severely damaged, leaving them stranded once more. Escape on foot seemed impossible, yet hope remained when they noticed the wreckage of another vehicle below, containing a usable axle. Without hesitation, they began repairs, stabilizing their own bus with tools and teamwork. Elsewhere, Kun encountered the dying bus driver, who courageously confronted him, warning that killing defenseless people would bring retribution. Kun callously disregarded this, executing the driver and resuming the chase. Encountering issues with their vehicle's equipment, Kun was forced to pause for repairs, which granted Mike and Danny precious time. After strenuous efforts, Mike's group successfully installed the replacement axle, allowing their escape to resume. However, Shuai received a text message ostensibly from his father, unaware Kun was using his father's phone to deceive him. Shuai unintentionally revealed the village chief's hiding spot. Kun dispatched assassins ahead, believing he'd finally cornered his adversaries. The assassin quickly found the isolated cabin and burst inside, firing wildly. Yet Kun's fake text had inadvertently backfired as the village chief recognized the trick and had deliberately lured the attackers into a trap. Meanwhile, Mike, Shuai, and the others reunited safely with the village chief, who warmly greeted them. Suddenly, Mike collapsed, severely weakened from his earlier injury. They hurriedly moved him inside the cabin, but medical supplies were scarce, forcing Danny to perform emergency treatment with minimal equipment. To distract Rose, Danny sent her to fetch water from the river, while the chief urgently planned their escape, aware they couldn't remain hidden long. The group realized their bus needed to be lighter and quickly discarded unnecessary items. However, the bridge over a nearby gorge remained incomplete, forcing them to rely on a crane to cross safely. Rose, who had gone alone to the river, heard suspicious noises and hid, observing Kun's men approaching. Terrified, she fled back to the cabin, chased by the assassins, who mistakenly believed they'd caught her. Danny surprised the assassins, swiftly eliminating him and protecting Rose. Back inside, Rose remained frightened, prompting Danny to teach her defensive combat techniques, demonstrating step by step how to block and counterattack. The following morning, Mike finally awoke, and after a brief recovery, they proceeded toward the unfinished gorge bridge. Kun, frustrated at losing them earlier, quickly guessed their destination on the Chinese border and hurried to intercept. As the crane began transporting Mike's bus across, Kun appeared with heavily armed reinforcements. The village chief bravely covered the group's escape, returning fire alongside Danny. Tragically, a bullet grazed Danny's head, knocking him unconscious, while the village chief sustained a critical wound. Kun coldly switched off the crane, leaving the bus dangerously suspended midair. Approaching the wounded chief, Kun ruthlessly executed him, then ordered his men to shoot everyone aboard the bus, aiming to eliminate witnesses completely. Amid heavy gunfire, Mike seized a momentary advantage, surprising Kun's men and allowing Danny, who regained consciousness, to provide covering fire. Mike courageously jumped into the crane's control room, eliminating a female assassin who had commandeered it earlier. Restarting the crane, Mike handed a recovered firearm to Shuai before leaping back onto the bus, which safely reached the other side. Enraged, Kun pursued, immediately sending his men across the gorge to resume their relentless chase. Soon Kun's men caught up to Mike's group again. There were still 50 kilometers left to reach the safety of the Chinese border, which meant at least another half hour under heavy pursuit. Realizing they had to quickly deal with their attackers, Danny instructed Rose how to shoot, and together they returned fire, trying to suppress their pursuers. Both sides exchanged fire fiercely, but neither could effectively hit the other. Seeing this, a female assassin pulled out a rocket launcher. Mike desperately swerved the bus to dodge as a rocket exploded above the tunnel. Suddenly, a motorcycle raced forward, attempting to block their path, but Mike decisively stepped on the accelerator, instantly destroying it. Danny passed out again due to the severe collision, and despite this victory, Kun's remaining assassins persisted relentlessly. Mike handed the few remaining bullets to Shuai and Rose, who briefly suppressed the attackers before quickly running out of ammunition. Seizing this chance, the female assassin boarded their bus, injuring both Shuai and Rose. Rose bravely confronted the assassin while Shuai swapped places with Mike, who was also severely injured and unable to fight effectively. Just as the assassin prepared to kill Shuai, Danny regained consciousness, delivering a powerful punch to the assassin. At that moment, another attacker climbed aboard, striking Danny hard. Mike desperately tried to help, but was easily overpowered, leaving both Mike and Danny locked in intense combat. At a critical moment, Rose courageously applied the defensive techniques Danny taught her earlier, successfully restraining the attacker, allowing Danny to swiftly kick him off the bus. Mike then seized his brother's urn, striking another attacker and throwing him out as well. Now only Kun remained, and Mike turned the bus, decisively confronting him. When their vehicles collided, Mike ruthlessly pushed Kun's vehicle toward the cliff's edge. Before finishing Kun off, Mike humorously asked everyone on the bus if Kun deserved this fate. Without hesitation, everyone voted unanimously to eliminate him, finally sending Kun off the cliff to meet his end. After this harrowing ordeal, Mike and the group safely arrived at the Chinese border. Sometime later, Shuai became the new village chief, successfully overseeing construction of a small dam that didn't harm the environment while providing ample water and electricity for the village. With their mission completed, Mike, Danny, and Rose said farewell before Mike and Danny climbed Everest together, finally scattering Gertie's ashes on the mountain, fulfilling his last wish. However, Danny appeared unusually somber. As Danny drove Mike to the airport, both men seemed eager to say something, yet couldn't bring themselves to speak, creating an awkward silence. After a reluctant farewell, Mike noticed climbing ropes in the airport gift shop, recalling Gertie's advice to pursue happiness. Realizing the strong bond he formed with Danny through their shared trials, Mike turned back from the airport, thinking perhaps he could accompany Danny for another adventure. As the two men reunited again, their journey concluded. This film is a sequel to the 2021 movie, The Ice Road, but instead of focusing on ice road truckers rescuing miners trapped under frozen lakes, the story moves to Nepal's perilous Himalayan roads, situated 12,000 feet above sea level. Liam Neeson once again takes on the role of savior. Although the two leads delivered commendable performances, the film's numerous logical flaws and unrealistic scenes left many points open to criticism. Overall, it's a typical commercial action movie with an old-school rhythm, offering predictable thrills, but nothing extraordinary. That's all for today's review. Thank you for watching. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions are the greatest encouragement. See you next time.